shadow against the purple night sky. Just ahead at first. This was no friendly, cuddly bunny. Oh my god, that face. This was a killer. It raised its axe. Nobody cares about a 15-year-old boy's opinion on a global pandemic. But seeing as you're here, why don't I tell you anyway? Don't get me wrong, we're not here to talk science and disease and whatever else. We're here to talk about something else. But we'll get there. I mean, I don't know when you're hearing this. It could be hundreds of years in the future, and I need to set the scene, don't I? With technology being what it is these days, this thing could last long, and I hope it does. People need to know. Anyway, if you're going to get it, this virus, you're going to get it. No amount of lockdown and social distancing is going to stop that. But the government insists, so there we are. In a small town in Virginia, where I live, which is practically in the middle of nowhere, there's nobody to enforce those rules anyway. Sure, people do abide by them, particularly the elderly and the vulnerable, but me? No way, man. I can't stay cooped up all day with my parents. And that's not me being nasty. I'm sure they don't want to be locked inside with me all day either. With each other, even. And a lot of other people must feel the same way, because all my other friends come out too, and we all hang out together. We don't go around each other's houses. There is some respect for the rules, but there's just no way we can stay inside all day. This one day, when we were all walking along the road, wheeling our bikes along, nobody was really on the road with their cars. Sure, people were flouting lockdown, but they couldn't go out of town where there were authorities enforcing the quarantine. When we noticed Old Man Ralph on his front porch in a rocking chair. Nobody had seen him for a few weeks, and there had been a usual smell of town gossip. But he'd still been taking in his supply drops that people were leaving on his porch for him. The same porch that he was sat on that morning as me and my friends were walking out of town to the country fields to race on our bikes. "Hey, Mr. Ralph," I shouted and waved, and a couple of my friends did the same. Our small town is the same as any other small town. You respect the elders. Everyone liked Old Man Ralph anyway. He was always telling people stories and seemed to crop up at every event. Even a private birthday party that some family were hosting, he was there. Weird? You might think so. To us, it was normal. To us, he was Old Man Ralph, basically a grandfather to us all, if that makes it any easier for you to understand. "Boys," he said softly, but his voice was deep enough to carry to us. "Come on over to the lawn." He waved us to him. We shared some apprehensive looks, not because we didn't like him or didn't want to, but because we knew how hard Mr. Ralph had been working to avoid the virus, and we didn't want to undo all that for him. I guess he'd gotten lonely and had decided that he'd had enough of his own company. I can understand that. It must have been a tricky situation for him to be in. However, it would have been rude to just keep walking on, so we dumped our bikes on the side of the road. Nobody was going to steal them. Everybody knew everyone around here, and headed over to him. We kept our distance, standing on his front lawn, 5 of us in total, and asked him how he'd been. He continued rocking back and forth on his chair and nodded slowly, telling us he'd been getting by, and he decided that now was the time to get back out into the world. Then he echoed my very thoughts when he said, "Let me tell you kids, if I've learned one thing in life, it's that if something is going to happen, it will." Everyone else was listening. He had a commanding presence, but I think I was the only one really taking it in. And I was the only one to respond. "Like, fate?" I asked. He stopped rocking for a moment and then resumed. "Suppose you could put that word to it, yes." He looked off into the distance, towards the fields that surrounded our town. "Where are you kids off to?" he queried. "Just to the fields," I said. "I'm going to race on our bikes." Ralph nodded again. "You know, come to think of it, I don't know if Ralph was his first name or last. People called him Old Man Ralph, not to his face. Or Mr. Ralph. So I assumed it was his second. But who really knew? Maybe it was both of his names." "Fun," he said, and then stopped rocking again, still looking off into the distance. "Ought to be careful," he added. "But Mr. Ralph," I started to protest. You said about the virus, what we all think that... He looked at me, dead in the eyes. He may have looked old and fragile, his skin looking as though it may peel from his bony body at any moment, but his eyes were bright and wide and alert, as though they didn't belong in this old man's body. Not the virus, son, he said, and then looked off towards the fields again. There are some things out there. What things? One of my friends blurted. Old man Ralph looked at all of us in turn, and when he said the name, it should have been comical, but none of us laughed. It was the seriousness of not only his voice, but his eyes, his expression, everything. The BunnyMan, he said. Fast forward. Old man Ralph told us the story, and oh boy did we listen. It is the single most fascinating and creepy thing I've ever heard in my life. The only question all of us had after hearing it was why nobody else had ever mentioned it before. Because, let's face it, all small towns have these little things like I've already said. Everyone knowing everyone, the town elder who everyone respects, and there's the third pillar of the community, the urban legend. His story began in the 1970s, when my parents wouldn't have even been my age. No, they wouldn't have even been born. Something about an overpass, a bridge that a train used to run through that had been abandoned decades before. This bridge, legend has it, is the home to, well, nobody knows exactly what it is. A masked maniac? A mammoth monster? It's home to something. Something that resembles a bunny and wields an axe. Old man Ralph told us all about it. During the 70s and 80s, there were sightings of this thing that went as far as the local police. Some guy, or whatever it was, in a bunny costume chasing people with an axe, as though to get them away from the bridge, what it had apparently taken as its abode. Thankfully, the passers-by were always in a car, so nobody had ever been hurt by it, but they had certainly been left with the memory. The police had never found anyone or anything. There were just these random sporadic sightings. Mr. Ralph told us all about those, and he even told us a little more, because he said he was old enough to remember it. In the 1950s, when the bridge was still in use, there was a train crash. It just so happens that the train was transporting mental patients to a new facility. All of the 30 or so escapees were rounded up over the following 48 hours, all but one. The very one who had, a year before, butchered his entire family on Easter. They never found him. All they ever found in the weeks and months following the crash were strung up, sometimes half-eaten bunny rabbits hanging from the bridge and the trees surrounding it. A man he may have been, Ralph had said, but a man can become something else, you know. If not for Ralph claiming he was old enough to remember it all, which was quite clearly true, I'd have said it was nonsense. Sure, it was still scary having someone in a costume chasing you, but surely it was just some local nut who had taken the urban legend too far? Well, apparently not. And anyway, we fast forward here because me and my friends never did go racing on our bikes. Instead, we waited until the sun started to set, and we took our bikes out to the fields, and then across into them, into the overgrown fields, and eventually a small woodland. We were going to find it, the bridge. We wanted to see for ourselves if this relic was still standing, or if it even existed at all. I, for one, knew old man Ralph was telling the truth, but there was still a couple of my friends who weren't buying any word of it. We should have been getting home around the time the sun was setting, and yet we were probably a good few miles away from our town, and people would start worrying. But we were on our own little adventure. It seemed fun at the time. Or perhaps fun is the wrong word. Certainly in my case, being someone who believed the tale in its entirety. But you know what they say about curiosity. We wandered through the trees for a while. Not a long while. It wasn't a forest, just a small woodland. And we eventually came out to the other side. By then, the sun had almost completely set, and if not for the dirt road, we'd have no doubt been completely disoriented. But we came out onto the path, and we still had our bikes. Remember, it just would have been stupid to ride on them through the long grass fields and the woodland. Easy for grass to jam the brakes in the overgrown fields, and a rock or something can send you off balance into the woodland. or even a low-hanging branch could knock you clean off your bike. Yep, too many pitfalls. Best to play it safe. We wheeled our bikes out onto the path, and I don't think any of us realized that what we were looking for was right there. The bridge known as the Colchester Overpass, better known as the BunnyMan Bridge. It wasn't as grand as I'd expected. It was a faded white color, no doubt having become dirtied and decrepit over the many years that it had been abandoned. It was small, too, arching only slightly off the ground, and we hadn't experienced much of an incline in the woodland or coming out of it. Not really a bridge, but BunnyMan Mound didn't really have the same ring to it, did it? "Guys," I said, turning to look at the bridge, having been the first one to notice it. The others turned too, and one of them voiced our collective thoughts. "Well, gang, all day for this? Bit anticlimactic." I'll tell you what it wasn't, though. The thing that appeared on top of it. A shadow against the purple night sky. Just a head at first. A head with two long pointy things jutting out of its head and drooping onwards. Then it came closer until it was standing on the edge of the bridge, looming over us. In the faint moonlight, I could see the faded dark gray color of its costume? Fur? The pointy things were ears, and that face. Oh my god, that face. The bridge had been disappointing, but this, the main event, made up for it. Contorted in a sort of rage-filled smile, with sharp fangs pointing out of the snout-like face. This was no friendly, cuddly bunny. This was a killer. Costume or not, it was designed for one thing, to strike fear into unwitting hearts. It raised its axe. The first time I noticed it as it glimmered in the moonlight, and there was a collective groan from our group. The thing hopped down from the bridge, just in the same manner as you'd expect the creature was named after to do so, and stood beneath it in the archway. But I saw this from over my shoulder, because we were already riding like demons on our bikes, away from that cursed being. We all eventually made it home safe, and our parents were worried sick, waiting with police officers. Locked down well and truly forgotten, and of course, old man Ralph was amongst them. Always present, always with that all-knowing look in his eyes. And he knew, all right. Oh boy, did he know. Just like all the other times, they never found anything or anyone at the bridge. But you already knew that, didn't you?